What makes a game so good that it becomes a franchise? What makes it the kind of franchise that becomes a staple to an entire console? The answer to these questions is relatively simple, and I can answer them by using Gears of War as an example. I've said this many times before, but I'll say it here once again. Gaming in the early 2000s was awesome. We saw the creation of many franchises during the Xbox 360 and PS3 era, the last gaming generation before live service and pay-to-win became main staples in gaming. Now, I'm not here to complain about live service. I've done enough of that already in previous videos, but I've recently revisited the Gears of War series, and I wanted to talk about it again. The first Gears of War game is the perfect example to use when talking about how to create a game that can eventually develop into a successful franchise, and in my opinion, the developers at Epic Games did so in the easiest ways possible. If you sit back and think about it, Gears of War is a pretty simple game. It's your standard third-person narrative campaign shooter. But Epic Games found creative ways to make this game stand out, which is impressive considering the rise of other shooter franchises at the time like Call of Duty, Halo, and Battlefield. So in today's video, I want to take a look at the very first Gears of War game and point out everything that helped turn that game into a successful franchise. It is truly one of the greatest Xbox franchises, and it is definitely up there on the all-time list of gaming as a whole. So way back in 2006, years before Epic Games would be known for Fortnite, they created a little game called Gears of War. Gears was your standard third-person cover shooter. It had a 5-act campaign and multiplayer as well. The game is by no means revolutionary for the genre, but the developers really hit the mark on a lot of elements in this game that made it a must-play. The game features a fantastic story, the characters are awesome, and so is the voice acting. The setting is cool and unique. The enemy design is awesome as they are both scary and varied in design. The gameplay mechanics are solid. The game is focused on its combat and narrative, and it's all well done. Level design is also top-notch, and it's perfectly designed for strategy whether you are playing alone with AI or when you're playing with your friends. So, you could choose who goes where and who does what. Who's going to take the path that allows you to cover the squad with a sniper, or if you're like me, you're just going to enjoy running up there to the Locust and either chainsawing them to bits with the Lancer or eviscerating them with the Nasher shotgun. The battlefields are varied too. There are many options for cover. Some cover can be destroyed or hopped over. There's multiple paths which lead to different ways to flank the enemy and catch them in a crossfire. And you play in a variety of settings too. You fight outside through city streets. You'll fight in buildings. You'll fight the Locust throughout day and even night. You'll spend some time fighting underground on the Locust turf. The ending is memorable thanks to a final boss fight that takes place on a train. Gears is fun because the gameplay mechanics are awesome, but before we talk about the gameplay elements, let's talk about the setting and the themes in this game that create a world that you want to be a part of. Gears of War takes place on a planet called Sera. The game's lore is actually pretty interesting. The humans just got done fighting a 79-year war against each other for the classic fight of resources. Sera is rich with a liquid called emulsion, which is a highly valued power source. The COG, the Coalition of Ordered Governments, won the Pendulum Wars, but then on Emergence Day, things got worse. That's when the Locusts attacked humanity. Thousands were killed and many cities were destroyed. Who are the Locusts? Well, they are genetically altered humans, basically part of a civilization that lived underground. These people were mutated with emulsion and DNA from other creatures that lived underground, so basically the Locusts turned into monsters. But an organized civilization of monsters. They had their own government and military. They were a well-structured society, but the Locusts were becoming too exposed to the emulsion and began to develop a parasitic infection. So that's when their queen Mira ordered the army to rise up from the ground and attack the humans on the surface. There's a lot of great lore for this series, but the games don't really spend too much time on it. I think honestly the newer games kind of touch back on, the origin story of the Locust and whatnot. There are, I believe, books and graphic novels and whatnot that can be read, and honestly, I might read them one day because this story and all this lore definitely interests me. But with that being said, the campaign is pretty straightforward. You play as Marcus Phoenix, and you lead a squad of notable COG soldiers. It's fun to play through the story with Marcus, Dom Santiago, Baird, and Cole. Each character has their own unique personality. Marcus takes no shit and always seems to be crabby. Dom is the most grounded and usually helps Marcus out a lot. Baird is an arrogant and sarcastic guy, the funny man of the group, if you will. Cole is the loudest and provides the most energy between the four. The personality of these characters and their voice actors are key factors to the enjoyment of the game. These guys talk all the time. There's yelling and shouting during battles, commentary in between firefights, and the cutscenes feel like a movie. Some games feel like you are in a ghost town when there's a silent protagonist or a limit on voice acting. It just feels badass to play as a COG soldier. All these dudes are buff and they look like action heroes that are bigger than the armor that they're wearing. And then you have the bad guys who are just as memorable as the good guys. The Locusts are very memorable due to the variety of enemy types and how they look. They are very intimidating. Now, one can argue that they are bullet sponges, but this wouldn't be the first game where enemies were featured to be like that. While some may be similar to cannon fodder, like wretches, drones, scouts, and grenadiers, you also have memorable gun battles with tougher enemies like Therons, Boomers, the Krill, Berserkers, Corpsers, Reavers, and then the big baddie in the first game, General Rom. These soldiers and monsters each fight in their own ways, so combat scenarios will change from time to time. Gunfights aren't simple when Reavers show up and fly around. Things are intense when a Berserker shows up because the only way you could kill them is by using the Hammer of Dawn. And then General Rom is a very cool antagonist. He doesn't really talk, you don't really see him that often in the game, but he looks scary as hell, and the best cutscene in the game features him in the beginning of the game where he is shown for the first time. There's a big battle going on and Lieutenant Kim has no idea Rom is quietly walking up behind him. Rom eventually reaches out to Kim, picks him up, and stabs him with a sword. And then the ending of the game is pretty cool. The final mission pits Marcus and Dom fighting Locust on a train, and they eventually face off against Rom in a rather difficult battle. After defeating Rom, they upload data which helps them fire off a light mass bomb, which destroys the underground network that the Locust have. It's a huge victory for the COG in the war against the Locust. Now, Gears of War also had multiplayer, and was it ever as big as COD, Battlefield, and Halo? I wouldn't say it was ever that big, but it had its own niche group of people, and it eventually had an esports presence in later titles. Outside a co-op campaign, Gears had a versus mode. There were 4 modes that were played across 16 maps. Epic Games added some of these maps as free DLC over time. Now, I wasn't the biggest Gears multiplayer fan out there, but I did enjoy playing it from time to time. That style of combat transitioned well from campaign to competitive multiplayer. The gameplay style of Gears was unique at a time that, especially where everyone was used to playing, first-person shooters like COD, Halo, and Battlefield, and there was just something about the way, some people would probably complain and say that the characters feel like they're stiff and they're rigid in the way they move, and yeah, you could say that's true, but it's not, up your sensitivity and you're spinning back and forth doing 360 no-scopes like you would do in something like Call of Duty or Battlefield. This gameplay did stand out, and it was pretty unique for more than just being a third-person perspective. Now, the game modes were pretty cool, and some of them did a good job of incorporating the Gears gameplay style. Execution, for example, was a mode that pitted 2 teams against each other. However, the only way you could actually kill them was by executing them. An execution is basically a finishing move on a downed enemy, and there's a few different ones based on the weapon you are currently holding. Annex is basically domination. You have to capture and defend certain areas to earn points for your team. My favorite mode was Assassination, in which each team had a leader which is controlled by one of the players, and that would change every game, so everybody would get a chance to be the leader. Teams must defend their leader while trying to take out the enemy leader, and again, the enemy leader must be executed. And then you have Warzone, which was simply a team deathmatch mode. Gears of War was a hit as soon as it was released. It was the most popular game on Xbox Live until Halo 3 came out. Gears 1 was the most played game on Xbox Live throughout 2007. Then you had 1 million copies that were sold within the first 2 weeks. The game earned high review scores and awards from many publications. The game was nominated for 10 awards and won 8 of them. Gears was actually the first game to sell out and reach the top 10 charts in Japan, so the game was a worldwide sensation. And I also just learned that Gears was awarded 5 Guinness World Records. These records include first console game to use Unreal Engine 3, fastest selling original Xbox 360 game, first music single to top the chart after promoting a video game, and that was for the song that played in the trailer. It was called Mad World. It was the Gary Jules version of it. It's amazing to see all the success Gears 1 had, and it earned a ton of awards and recognition. Epic Games always intended to make a sequel, and if they needed any help with convincing Microsoft to approve that, well, I'm sure they didn't really need any help after seeing all the awards and everything that they earned. If modern day game developers need a source of inspiration on how to create a good game and one that could possibly turn into a successful franchise, well then I'd like to remind everyone again that it is really simple. The formula for this is easy. Create an interesting story and group of characters with phenomenal voice acting, make sure your enemies are memorable and challenging to fight, make sure the setting, the themes, and the tones are all unique and stand out amongst other games, especially in whatever genre you are creating that game in. Lastly, make sure you incorporate your game's gameplay style into the multiplayer. Don't just have standard game modes like Team Deathmatch, do more than that. Gears succeeded in everything I just mentioned, and with that winning formula, Epic Games was able to kickstart one of the greatest gaming franchises in the history of Xbox and gaming as a whole. And there's actually rumors swirling around lately that Gears 6 might be announced this year, and I hope so because this is a world that I really want to hop into again. Are you a fan of Gears of War? Tell me your thoughts on the first game and the franchise as a whole. And do you want to see a Gears 6 at this point? Or do you think the franchise needs to just rest and lay low? Thanks for checking out the video. Please support in some way if you can. Like the video, subscribe, share it with some friends. I'd appreciate any support you guys could give. Also, please go check out other videos on the channel. You could find my content on podcasting platforms for the audio version. Just Google Analyze This Podcast. You could also find me on X and TikTok, X at AnalyzeThis_YT, TikTok at AnalyzeThis54_YT. Thanks again and take care.